Apprentices of Jesus. So this morning I'm reading from two passages, one in 1 Corinthians and one from the Gospel of Matthew. They should come up on the screen for you. So 1 Corinthians 9:24-27 says this: "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize." And then in Matthew 6, verses 5-6, it says this. It says, "Whenever you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites, because they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by people. Truly, I tell you, they have their reward. But when you pray, go into your private room, shut your door, and pray to your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you." This is the word of God. Please do take your seats. So as mentioned, we're continuing our series today, and we're looking on the spiritual disciplines, and today we're looking at the practice of silence and solitude. And what I'm about to share is very much building on the last sermon that I gave back in, I think it was March or April time. So I'm just going to give a quick recap of that sermon for those who weren't there. I don't want to spend too long recapping, so I'm going to power through this. So you're about to hear a 30-minute sermon in about 5 minutes. Lord, help us all. So last time we talked about how the paradigm within which spiritual disciplines takes place is the whole life call to follow Jesus, which Jesus makes really clear throughout the New Testament. We see Jesus over and over again say that to be his disciple is to lay down everything to follow him. In Matthew 16, we read Jesus saying, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul?" So this is the paradigm that Jesus is giving them. He's saying to follow me looks like something, but it looks like you giving up everything. It looks like laying your life down. It looks like self-denial rather than self-fulfillment. It looks like the pursuit of a cruciform, cross-shaped life. It looks like dying to ourselves. It looks like complete and utter surrender, surrendering our work, our identity, our relationships, our dreams, laying them all down in a process of dying to self so that we might walk in the fullness of life that Jesus came to give us. So at the heart of it is this question: do you believe Jesus is who he says he is? If you believe who he says he is, then you will be willing to lay everything down because you know you are putting it all into the hands of the person you can ultimately trust with everything. And we spoke last time how it's important to remember this framing for the spiritual disciplines, because without it, they can just kind of be another worldly attempt at personal well-being and personal fulfillment. You know, silence and solitude and a bit of mindfulness and meditation over there. Throw in a bit of yoga maybe, or a bit of intermittent fasting. And we'll all be having a great time living these fully optimized lives, right? That's the dream. But the spiritual practices are not primarily just a life hack to help you optimize your personal well-being. They're intended to help mediate a relationship with a person. They're intended to help you frame your life around the presence of God. Previously, we went into depth in the 1 Corinthians passage we read today to see how Paul equates discipleship with a kind of strict training. And we explored how often in our discipleship we confuse training with trying. We try really hard, and there's kind of lots of, furrowed brows around the place, and we sign up to do all the stuff, and we do all the church teams, and we try really hard to follow Jesus for a season. We try really hard in family life, and often we just end up anxious and burnt out and needing some time away from everything. But the spiritual disciplines are not just about adding more stuff into an already busy life. It's not just dialing up the effort and trying really hard, but they're about training with intention. So the call to follow Jesus is not a call to striving, but it's a call to surrender. And then from that place of surrender, we train and we live with intention that we might orient our lives around being with Jesus, around becoming like Jesus, and then around doing the things that Jesus did. And so the role of spiritual disciplines is simply this. There should be a definition on the screen. Practices based on the lifestyle of Jesus that create a time and space for us to access the power and the presence of the Holy Spirit, and in doing so, be transformed from the inside out. That was the sermon from last time in 5 minutes. Maybe we should just do 5-minute sermons from now on and just get off. That's a joke. You're not allowed. And so with that being said, we come to today's spiritual practice of silence and solitude. And this is a practice that honestly that God has used perhaps more than anything else to really transform my own life in a dramatic and a powerful way. I'm a different man than I once was, and how the Holy Spirit has used this practice in my life is perhaps the most significant part of that journey of transformation. And before exploring it in a little more depth, I just want to frame a bit of context as to why this spiritual discipline, I believe in particular, can be particularly powerful and transformative. We know that the journey of discipleship, the journey of following Jesus is not just a journey of formation, right? It's a journey of counter-formation, where God is trying to form us counter to how the surrounding culture has already formed us. Or in the words of the Apostle Paul in Ephesians, he's trying to help us die to our old selves and put on the new self and be renewed in the spirit of our minds. Or again, in his letter to the Romans, he says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. I don't know if you ever feel like you have an aspiration to grow in an area of your life and faith, but you constantly feel like you're wrestling against yourself, like you're your own worst enemy. And maybe you constantly feel like it's a wrestle that you just keep losing. And part of that is because sometimes you've already been formed. And often we might have to unlearn some of these ways that we've been formed, some of the ways that we're conforming to the patterns of this world without even realizing, so that we can instead be transformed into the image and the likeness of Jesus. So it's a good question to ask, well, how is the surrounding culture trying to form us? We often talk about, consumerism and materialism or radical individualism, Darren's favorite, which he mentions every week, which we love, and it's good. And today I want to look briefly at a slightly different way in which culture has shaped us and is shaping us, if that's okay. So we live in a modern society, so it's a good question to ask, what kind of human does this society need me to be? What are some of the formative powers of this society, and how is it trying to shape me specifically? In human society in the past, I'm going to give a little bit of a description. We're going to spend 5 minutes here, okay, so stay with me. This will land in a significant place, hopefully, God willing. So in human society in the past, the reason we all went to work, right, used to be attached primarily to a sense of communal human need, okay? We figure out what we all need to survive, and then we say, let's work hard to make sure we create enough of that so that we can all survive together. It was a communal struggle of survival and hopefully flourishing. But in modern society, the idea of human need is kind of replaced by this idea of surplus value, okay? Which basically means that society is primarily built to try and simply create as much wealth as possible. So instead of working together according to the satisfaction of human need, we invest money, we work, we strategize to create as much surplus value in society as possible. And whilst in many ways this has been phenomenally successful, and it really has, but unlike human need, there is no ceiling to the idea of surplus value. With surplus value, there is no ceiling. There is no destination at which we're trying to arrive. The finish line is always just moving further and further away. We're simply trying to create more and more and more, because it's in the creation of more that people make more money. You can see that this system can make life a little bit of a hamster wheel. Maybe you feel that. The point is not actually to arrive anywhere. The point is to just keep producing. And so to be a good human, we just have to keep acquiring more and more. That's kind of our role in society, to keep acquiring, to keep consuming. And to do that, you have to create an environment in which humans constantly feel dissatisfied with life as they have it, which is fascinating, right? We arguably live in it, and we can talk about more of this afterwards. If you disagree, that's okay. But we arguably live in a society where we have to constantly be dissatisfied to thrive. Think about it. If everyone woke up tomorrow content and satisfied, the current system might not work anymore. If we all woke up tomorrow content and satisfied and flourishing in our innermost selves, we might need a new societal system. And so this system is forming us in a whole bunch of different ways, and 2 ways that I want to zoom in on, that the world is forming us and that it's good to be aware of. The world that we live in is often referred to as an attention economy, One of the main ways people make money is to grab your attention and to hold on to it for as long as they can. If I can hold your attention, I can make money off you. And then they make these incredible, beautiful devices, addictive devices called screens, and we just love them, don't we? They're brilliant. They're just like, inventions of human ingenious, but they invent these devices which are everywhere, and then we have all these companies vying for our attention. All these companies are desperately trying to make these screens and these apps to have as much of your attention as they can get, to make them as addictive as possible, spending millions and millions of pounds to do so, because that's where the money is. The more I get you distracted, the more I can hold your attention, the more wealth I can create off you. And let's just name it, they're incredibly successful at this, right? I don't know if you ever have a bit of a social media detox, and you have a week off social media or whatever, and the moment you come back on, and it's really healthy, and you're all boundary, and it's 43 minutes a day, or whatever the boundary you put in place. And it's healthy for about 5 days, maybe, give or take, before you slowly slide back into using these screens in a way that's a bit excessive and slightly compulsive, where you can feel the addiction of these screens as it takes hold again. Anyone else relate to that? Is it just me? Just me, maybe. Me and Darren, thanks, cheers, mate. There's a reason some people are now leaving these companies to start campaigning against them, saying that we're shamelessly kind of training a generation into addiction. There's a reason that's happening. So many of us live in this age with what researcher Linda Stone calls continuous partial attention. Like we're there, but without really being there. Our eyes always half on the closest screen. These screens robbing us of our ability to be present to one another, present to ourselves, and more than anything, present to God. We need a spiritual practice that will help train our attention on the right things. One of the other ways that this society is forming us is I believe that we all just live, in London especially, at this frenetic, frantic pace that is arguably unsustainable. The world has a vested interest in you living as fast as possible. In the competition of life, the people who make the most and create the most are the ones who get there first. So we need humans to be living as fast as possible. In London especially, we lead these mega busy, frantic lives, running around from thing to thing. Every hour of our diary is circumscribed and diarized, and is either mobilized towards actualizing some vision of the good life, or it's spent in escapism from life, usually in front of a screen, desperately trying to get some semblance of life and energy back. We're just so busy all the time. I don't know if you ever have that moment you go to organize dinner with a friend or something, and you get your diaries out and you're both there. And you're like, no, I can't do that day. No, sorry. No, I can't do that day. No, I'm sorry, I can't do that day. And they're like, what about that? You're like, yes, brilliant, I can do that day. It's like, amazing. So we'll have dinner together in 7.5 weeks, and I can't wait, and it's going to be great, and I'll see you then. The thing about this distraction and this busyness, this insane pace of life that we live at, is that I believe for most of us, it subtly works against what it means to live a life of worship. There is a pace of life that works against, for lots of us, not for all of us, but for lots of us, it works against what it means to live a life of worship. There is something about awe and wonder and worship that is correlated with slowing down, maybe even correlated with silence and solitude. Think about it. Nobody has a moment of transcendence, right, and wants to speed up. Nobody has a raw moment of awe and wonder and wants to distract themselves. Nobody stands in front of an incredible sunset and wants to go faster. We stand in front of an incredible sunset and we slow down. Like we amble. We take it in. We probably take a photo too, but that's another story. If someone got tickets to an art museum and they were excited to go and see some of the most incredible art in the history of humanity, and then they jogged through the museum, we'd all be like, no, you've kind of missed the point. You've missed the wood for the trees here. Nobody climbs to the top of a mountain or stands underneath the northern lights and gets there and thinks, let's put on a podcast. No one does that. In moments of awe and wonder, in moments of worship, what we usually do is we stop talking. We stay silent. We get real silent. We slow down. We stop to listen, to appreciate, to take it in, and sometimes we even stop to worship. So the question I want to ask is, if you're in a time where God feels distant, could it be that maybe you've been running too fast to hear him, too busy to notice, too frantic to worship? And I don't mean for all of this I genuinely don't mean for all of this to sound super apocalyptic, but I do believe there's kind of a turning of the tide that is happening in society at the moment, where people are going, hold on a minute, something isn't quite right. There is something about modern society that is not good for the human soul. And maybe you feel that too. Maybe you feel that within yourself, like maybe that rings true. There is something about this that is not good for the human soul. You know, we call it a mental health crisis or a loneliness epidemic, but we rarely stop and be like, what's the systemic stuff? What is the systemic stuff that lies at the root of all of this? And I think for a lot of us, the fruit of this culture is a kind of low-grade anxiety, right? That most people now just live with, always bubbling under the surface, occasionally rearing its head until it breaks through the surface in a more significant way. Or for some of us, it's like an emotional numbness. Both of these were true for me, where we're just kind of like machines trying to race through these mega productive lives, but without ever really feeling alive, numb to each other and numb to the presence of God. And friends, my point this morning is simply that there is just so much more for us than this. The risen Jesus Christ wants you personally to walk in the fullness of life. It was St. Irenaeus who said, the glory of God is a human being fully alive. And I really believe that's true. The glory of God. What if this room, what if the church was known as a room of people? Man, if you want to find life, go get around those Christians. Go get around those followers of Jesus. That would be unto the glory of God. And I believe Jesus has a vision of a church who would teach the world what it means to be truly present, who would model to each other what it looks like to humanize each other's existence and at times a dehumanizing world. Jesus, in the passage we read in Matthew 6, he's just started a Sermon on the Mount and has just painted this picture of the upside down kingdom in the Beatitudes and beyond it. And then he gets to this passage on prayer, and it's really simple. And he says, when you pray, don't be like the people who pray to be seen. They love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by people. Truly, I tell you, they have their reward. And he goes on to say, but when you pray, go into your room, shut the door, get alone with God, and pray to your Father who is in secret. So when you get into your room and you close the door and you turn the attention of your heart to God, you get to the secret place, as it's been called for centuries. And who do you find is already there waiting for you? God the Father is in the secret place waiting. It says that's where he is. He is in secret. That's where he dwells, in the secret place. And the question for us is, when was the last time that we joined him there? You know, have we built a rhythm of life around his presence in the secret place? Have we diarized it? If we're training with intention as apprentices of Jesus, have we intentionally planned it into our busy lives, that time in the secret place with our Father in heaven? Jesus goes on to say, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And Hebrews 11 verse 6 echoes Jesus' words here, saying, and without faith it is impossible to please him. For whoever will draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. So those who live for the praise of people, those who live for this kind of performative self, those who live to be acknowledged and praised, they will have their reward. They will get the praise and they'll get their affirmation. They'll have their reward. It just won't do what they want it to do. It will be fleeting. It won't result in their flourishing. But those who seek God will also get their reward. They will get God himself, and he will heal your soul, and he will breathe life into your body. You know, he's the great shepherd who makes you lie down in green pastures and leads you beside quiet waters. The discipline of silence and solitude is simply the discipline of carving out regular time and space in a busy life to sit and to be and to listen with God. It's rooted in the life of Jesus himself. He made a habit of retreating into a place of solitude, which is kind of wild if you think about it, right? Jesus, the second person of the Godhead, the man who fully demonstrated what it is to live in complete dependence on the power of the Spirit, over and over and over again throughout the scriptures, retreats into a place of solitude with God, his ultimate source of strength. Even Jesus knew where he needed to be, the secret place, the place of solitude. Straight after Jesus' baptism, in Mark 1, it says he's led out into the wilderness. And the word for wilderness is the word eremos. It can also be translated solitary place or secluded place, this word eremos. And after Jesus' baptism, he's led into the wilderness and he's led to go toe-to-toe with Satan. And he's in the wilderness for 40 days. But I love that in Mark chapter 1, we see Jesus return from 40 days in the wilderness for the start of his ministry. And he spends like a day ministering and healing all these different people. And immediately the day after, we read in Mark 1:35, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Maybe he played too, I don't know, where he prayed. And solitary place in that verse is that word again, it's the word eremos, the wilderness, a solitary place, a secluded place. So just to get this right, Jesus spends 40 days in the wilderness, which is a bit intense. I'm not saying we'll have to do that, but Jesus spends 40 days in the wilderness and comes back for a day or two, does a bit of ministry here or there, heals a few people, and then literally sneaks off again because he knows he needs more wilderness time. This is the Son of God who's like, get me back to the wilderness, get me back to that solitary place with my Father. That's what I need. I know who my source is. He knows the only place he's going to be sustained for the life that God has called him to is the secret place with the Father. And we see this pattern over and over throughout the scriptures, literally dozens of times through the gospel. Jesus, God incarnate, ministering to people, pouring himself out, and then retreating over and over to be alone with God. And in fact, John Mark Comer makes the point that throughout the scriptures, the busier Jesus seems to get, he seems to retreat more to the solitary places, not less. And I know we all have these crazy, busy London lives, and we really do, lots of us. We arguably live busier, faster-paced lives than any humans who have gone before us. And we're all super busy and we're all tired quite a lot of the time. But it's this business that means we need to retreat to this secluded place even more, not less. You know, the reason I gave all that context about the nature of society is because I genuinely believe we've never needed this practice more. I genuinely think that might be true. We desperately need silence for an age of distraction. We desperately need solitude in an age of busyness. You know, if Jesus, the Son of God, needed it in his day, how much more do we need it in our day? You know, where we say no to the noise, no to all the things pulling at our time, and say no to the distraction and the addiction of screens. When we get away from the temptation to perform, to compete, to compare. When we learn how to evaluate a life not just according to its productivity and busyness. Where you get alone with God and simply be, simply listen. You know, where you bring your whole flawed, wonderful self before him and allow him to speak your identity over you again and again and again so that it starts to seep into your heart. This is my beloved son. This is my beloved daughter whom I love. With you I'm well pleased. Ruth Haley Barton, in her book, An Invitation to Solitude and Silence, which I highly recommend, by the way. If you want to read more about this, get this book. Ruth Haley Barton, An Invitation to Solitude and Silence. She says this: solitude and silence are not self-indulgent exercises for times when an overcrowded soul needs a little time to itself. Rather, they are concrete ways of opening to the presence of God beyond human effort and beyond the human constructs that cannot fully contain the divine. The practice of silence and solitude is not just a retreat for introverts. And as an introvert, I say that, sadly, it's not just a retreat for introverts. It's an active disengagement. There's an activeness about it. It's a disengagement from the distractions of the world to confront God himself, to face yourself, to learn where you're actually at, and then to bring your whole self before him. The place where you can't perform, the place where your productivity is worthless. And it's challenging, and it takes a real level of intention. It's so countercultural for us to set aside a busy life, to enter what feels like unproductive time, to instead prioritize simply being with God. And it challenges on a soul level too. I believe it's in silence that we often become aware of all those inner dynamics that we've been trying to avoid and drown out. And this is perhaps the hardest bit of it all. You know, how often are the distractions simply a means of us avoiding the internal realities that we can't bear to face? It's only when you get alone and you get silent with God that you're able to hear the inner chaos that you've been living with. Or it's here where you realize how addicted you are to the dopamine hit of another screen. And it's worth saying, you know, when I started practicing this, the discipline of silence, the internal chaos that I was living with, like, oh my days, just the noise and the distraction and the doubt and the pain and the hurt and the busyness and the trauma. You get into the silence and your head is just going 1,000,000 miles an hour, bouncing around 1,000,000 different things. But in that moment you realize, this is what my head's been doing anyway. This is what's been going on in my heart and in my soul. I was just living too fast to notice. I didn't realize what I'd been trying to numb myself to until I stopped long enough to really hear it. It's no wonder I was an emotionally stunted man, which I really was. And initially that experience of entering into silence, just to be really clear, was not enjoyable. It really wasn't. It was painful. I know I've spoken before about my own struggles with mental health, and I speak about it quite openly in the hope that it might help others. But I had struggled with depression and anxiety for much of my adult life. It came to a head a number of years ago when I was just in a deep pit. My wife is a musician who was away on tour, and she came back from tour to find me not in a good way. I'd basically sat in a dark room for a whole month by myself. And on Sundays when I'd leave for church, where I was one of the leaders still, let that be a lesson, I would brush myself off. I would put on a brave face and play the role of leader. And honestly, it was the performance of a lifetime. It was Oscar worthy. But then I'd go home to sit in a dark room for another week, living at a pace that was unsustainable. And I call it a nervous breakdown because eventually it was like my body just gave up. It's like my nervous system had had enough, like it was saying, if you're not going to give me rest, I'm going to force you to take it. And I just collapsed physically, mentally, emotionally. I was depressed, I was anxious, I was struggling with suicidal ideation. It was such a dark time of life, and I was there for quite some time. But honestly, it was discovering the presence of Jesus in that wilderness, my own wilderness, discovering him in that silence that honestly transformed my life forever. And it wasn't instantaneous and it wasn't easy, it was hard. But when I got alone and I got into the silence and the inner chaos that I'd been trying to live with was revealed, I knew where I needed healing. I knew that I hadn't been drinking from the living water that is Jesus Christ. I don't even think I knew how, to be honest. I realized I've been trying to perform for God rather than simply be with him, rather than surrender to him and be transformed by his love and transformed by his presence. When you practice the discipline of silence, there's an external silence and there's an internal silence. And the more you practice it, the more you invite God into that space, the more the external silence becomes an internal silence, an internal stillness, and an internal peace, centered around the presence of Jesus, whereas Paul writes in Colossians, you learn to let the peace of Christ rule in your heart. A living embodiment of the call to be still and know that he is God, not us. And I believe that God is calling us into this practice of silence and solitude. And in fact, as I come to a close, why don't the band come up? I believe God is calling us into this practice of silence and solitude. But please know, can I just say also, this comes without any judgment whatsoever. In that passage in Mark 6 we read earlier, it also says this. It says, then because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. I like to think that this has just been, I love the realness of this moment. So Jesus saying, we're all busy, we're all tired. They did not even have a chance to eat. I like to think that you just threw that in for the new mums in the room, like some solidarity. I don't know if you've ever had every intention of making some time to be with God and then reasons completely out of your control, it's snatched away from you. As I say, I'm sure the parents can relate. This is going to look so different for all of us, right? It's going to look different for the student who's just finished their studies this summer than for the 35-year-old mum of 2 kids under 4. I really understand that. So feel no pressure to compare, to look what someone else is doing. Even if for you it looks like 10 minutes every other day, just start where you're at. Before you put on that Netflix series, before you listen to that podcast, before you have that glass of wine, I encourage you, get rid of the screens, take 10 minutes to sit silently with your Creator and watch what he does with that space. We live in an age of chronic busyness and chronic anxiety, and it just kind of bubbles away underneath the surface. But just like Jesus was, we're too busy not to do this. We're too busy not to do this. I believe God is calling us into the eremos, the wilderness, the solitary place, the place we can't perform. And I believe he's calling us into silence, to put down our phones, to step away from distraction, and to confront our interior worlds. So my encouragement to you today is that take 10 minutes this week and sit in silence with your Creator. Bring your whole self before him. And I believe that God will use that time to transform our lives. You know, as it says in the passage we read today, your Father who sees in secret, he will reward you. He says he rewards those who diligently seek him. And there is no greater reward than the gift of the presence of God in your life. The good news is that Jesus said he came to give us fullness of life. And I believe that there is life waiting for us in the place of solitude and in the place of silence. Amen. Let me close in prayer.